So welcome everybody to our AmCham Talks. A very warm welcome. When I look out of the window, we seem to have spring again and a bit of summer. So perfect start of a hopefully nice weekend for all of you. At the beginning, as usual, please note that this event will be recorded and we will publish part of the video and audio in our social media channels as well as on our website. So please be aware and take appropriate actions if you don't want to be in the video or etc. As usual, please go all on mute if you're not speaking, so we don't have any background noises, and we can hear our speaker loud and clearly. Before we come to Stefan Borgas, which I warmly welcome today as CEO of RHI Magnesita, I want to just highlight the next events. On the 9th of June, we will have, together with Webster University, a webinar with Dr. Bradley Wiggins, and the topic is for sure an interesting one. It's about deconstructing the event of January 6, 2021, which was the insurrection at the US Capitol, and his insights and interpretation on what happened there and how did it go. So everybody is welcome to join the webinar, and invitation will be sent out by the office or is already sent out, Susanne, right? Okay. And on the 25th of June, the next AmCham talk will take place again in video format. And we have the honor to have Professor Dr. Elisabeth Stadler, Generaldirektorin und Vorstandsvorsitzende Vienna Insurance Group, in our plenum and premium. And so please reserve this date on the 25th of June for the next AmCham talk. So I'm coming to today's topic. Warmly welcome Stefan Borgas once again. I take the liberty to introduce you briefly. You were grown up and raised in Germany as well as in France, followed with business studies in Germany and Switzerland. And you spent your first 14 years in professional life at a well-known company, BASF, in plastic materials and life science businesses, and you had the opportunity to travel around the world with working and living places like USA, Germany, Ireland, and China, respectively. In 2004, you have been appointed CEO of the Swiss-based Lonza Group, which was transformed from a diversified specialty chemicals player into a world-leading life science company under your leadership. From 2012 to 2016, you had the opportunity to be the CEO of Israel Chemicals based in Tel Aviv. And Israel Chemicals is the largest industrial company in Israel and a global player in specialty minerals. And minerals seem to be the connecting point then to RHI Magnesita. And you have been asked in 2016, end of 2016, to take over the CEO role of RHI Magnesita, headquartered in Vienna. And RHI Magnesita is the global leader in refractory materials. I think all well known in Austria, but it's truly become a global player in the very special area of an industry segment. The keynote of today is under the title RHI Magnesita, Managing the Heat of the Post-COVID World. And I would hand over to you, Mr. Borgas, and give you the floor for the keynote, and we will have a Q&A session afterwards for question and answers. So thank you very much for being here, and up to you.
Thank you very much, Martin and Susanne, for organizing this. I'm here with Anderson Gutierrez, who has helped me in putting together this presentation. He's one of our smart global managers in the company, which shows you that we're Austrian headquartered, but truly international. I'm going to share the screen with you so that you can follow the presentation. Managing the heat of the post-COVID world hopefully connects what we do at RHI Magnesita, which I'll show you in a second, so that you get an understanding of the company. But I want to try to link this to the geopolitical or geoeconomic challenges that I think we will face in the next years. And hopefully this is not a company presentation, but a discussion of various topics that we all face as businessmen. I will use a lot of examples from RHI Magnesita during the course of the presentation. So perhaps I'll show you a short video that tells you what we're doing at RHI Magnesita in our company.
We are RHI Magnesita, the driving force of the refractory industry. Taking innovation to 1200 degrees Celsius and beyond, our solution.
Let's try this on.
We are RHI Magnesita, the driving force of the refractory industry. Taking innovation to 1200 degrees Celsius and beyond, our solutions lead the field. And without us, global industry would grind to a halt. Steel, glass, cement, copper. The building blocks of modern life are partially manufactured at temperatures hotter than a volcano. This creates a need for highly specialized equipment, as very few materials can survive such heat without melting. That's where we come in. From mining to production and from installation to recycling, we provide safe, sustainable, advanced refractory solutions. Over 10,000 customers in different industries worldwide rely on RHI Magnesita. Our company was formed when two of the market leaders joined forces to create the world's largest refractory company. Our R&D teams are unrivaled. We make our industry more efficient and more sustainable. That means we're investing in cutting-edge technology, 3D printing, robotics, and nanotechnology. We embrace change. With a collaborative and open mindset, we draw on a global talent base to generate great ideas and turn them into reality. RHI Magnesita, taking innovation to 1200 degrees Celsius and beyond.
And this is why we call ourselves the heat managers, because we deal with these atrocious, super high temperatures and all the problems that are related with this. You see on this slide our COVID damaged numbers of 2020, which are about 25% below what they would be in a normal year. But you can see that we're a truly global company. We're really spread all around the world. We have no single region that makes up more than 20% of our revenue. When we look at our US business, which might be interesting for most of the listeners here, we have 40% market share in the US with clear market leaders there. And we really sell to every single steel plant in the US, every glass factory, and almost every cement kiln in the country. So we're everywhere in the industry. So that so far to the numbers. Then we were quite nicely on course to build out this global business. We had a good, solid business strategy. People were aligned, and then came COVID. Nothing that we ever foresaw. We have a solid, good, well-built risk management system, but nowhere in this risk management system did we ever talk about a pandemic hurting our business. So what is this? This was the question when this happened. How dangerous it is? Is it just like the flu, or is it much more dangerous than this? What is a lockdown? Nobody had in our company ever dealt with the lockdown? Is it over fast like it was in China? We have a pretty large business in China with almost 2,000 people there. So we learned from our Chinese colleagues early on when the pandemic came, and they said, come around April, they said, oh, everything's finished. We are almost back to normal levels. This is a V recovery, no problem. And we asked ourselves the question, is this going to be the same all over the world, everywhere? And we asked the question, who will pay for all the damages? We had just questions. Our biggest focus in these early days of the pandemic and in the lockdown, in the first lockdown, was around liquidity. We were panicked about running out of cash. So we focused the entire company on preserving cash. After about 8 weeks, we saw that we have no problem, we can manage. We emptied our supply chain. So we had lots of money in the banks. Our employees stayed at home most of the time. We didn't send very many people into unemployment. We didn't use many of the government programs. Our factories continue to operate, albeit at a lower level, but they continue to operate. So our liquidity concerns were finished relatively quickly. And then at the end of April last year, we sat back and said, is this pandemic just a blip? Is it a one-time thing and once it's over, we continue? Or is it a nightmare and once we wake up, everything will be like before? We clean up our face and our eyes and then we move? Or is something going to change? And very quickly, we came to the conclusion, post-COVID is not going to be pre-COVID. Because many of the things that were lingering, that were already present in the global economy, were massively accelerated through COVID. And you see 4 of those items here on the chart. Volatility in the supply chains is something we believe will be here for quite a few years. It's not going back. Actually, it's higher now than it was during COVID. Digitalization made a massive push, not just to video conferences, but in all of the areas. Business models now are threatened because of this. And we have much higher risk of non-industry participants to enter in our industries and in many others. The climate crisis is much higher in the attention of people and government, and the Shell verdict 2 days ago in Holland, I think demonstrated this. There's now discussions also in Austria. Should the government force companies more directly to decarbonize? Even in the US, this is an issue. I'll get to talk to this over the course of the next few minutes. There's 4 points I want to dive into a little bit deeper. And try to give a perspective from the European American viewpoint, and try to give you some answers that in RHI Magnesita we're trying to give to these challenges, although we don't have a perfect answer to any of this. So let's start with geopolitics. There was a time when business and politics worked on different highways. There were a lot of political things that happened and business kind of plowed on its own way. Of course, with connections, but the speed of the development of the global economy was the determining drumbeat, and politics all around the world followed and made sure that businesses could develop and economies could develop. But this is changing now. Many of the geopolitical actions and events that happen influence businesses now and actually push back our economic agendas and our business agenda. In the last report of the World Economic Forum, as you see on this chart here in the middle, we can clearly see that all of the geopolitical risks that had been here before in the post-COVID reality have accelerated, all of them. Part of that comes from mistrust between countries and regions and between governments. Part of this comes, especially in the Western world, from the mistrust of populations into their governments. And here that has been accelerated massively through the pandemic. Or it even comes to the, this is also accentuated with realizations that maybe the Western democratic state system is not the most perfect one, because at least in this pandemic, we have seen that the Western democratic countries are not anymore the most resilient and the fastest to answer to these problems. Clearly, our Western democratic countries have proven themselves lacklusters compared to China. And of course, then people say, but that's not a democracy, so we cannot compare. But also to other Asian democracies, such as Taiwan or Korea or New Zealand or so, who have all reacted much faster, much clearer, and protected their populations much better. And this creates an environment which we didn't have before. So we have new geopolitical order, or an acceleration of the trends of the geopolitical changes, and much more volatility coming with this. From our perspective, with the US being such an important market for us, where we have such an important market position, and we're actually such an important company for the US industry also, we see a certain disparity between what the US is saying and what the US is doing. And you can see some examples listed here, but in terms of the actions, actually not very much has changed compared to the previous presidential periods. And I don't want to take this Biden-Trump comparison. There's a lot of rhetoric here, but the changes have really started with the Obama years already, where the trend in the US is clearly going away from Europe, leaving Europe more alone, more by itself, also to deal with certain regional problems, such as in the Middle East. The Middle East will become much less interesting for the US, and Europe is going to have to either step in or deal with the fact that they don't want to step in. We have, of course, the whole decoupling the topics from China. Is the world really going to split into two economic blocks, the Chinese influence bloc and the US influence bloc, that are eventually going to fight each other? Or how is this going to develop? We don't know, of course. What we are doing inside RHI Magnesita, you can see listed here on the right. How are we trying to deal with this? Our biggest lever really is to strengthen our regional setups so that we get prepared to a somewhat of a decoupling, but we keep this globally coordinated. So if the decoupling doesn't happen, we still have the global network. For sure, we need to do a much better job than in the past to interact with local governments, not just with our government at home, but everywhere in the world. But we also need to try to fight this forces that go into regional blocks, and try to, through our industry, bring the world back together. We have very much driven the creation of a global industry associations for our little industry, the refractory industry, which is called the World Refractory Association. We are pushing this very hard, but it's very difficult to convince companies all over the world to actually really engage, because everybody is so busy at home. The second topic I want to talk about a little bit is the trade. One of the wake-up calls after COVID was how fragile and even dependent some of our supply chains are. We have taken global shipping infrastructure for granted, but we realize now that these fast and seamless supply chains can turn into very long, convoluted, very problematic challenges, very disruptive. The Suez Canal event was just one of them, but we have a global shipping reliability now of 34%. that means you have 34% chance that the ship that you book is leaving on time. This in the past 40 years was between 75 and 85%, which means 2 out of every 3 ships are late, which means suddenly all of the just-in-time inventory setups are not working anymore, and we have massive disruptions. The delay sometimes is not, sometimes is weeks or even 1 or 2 months, and that, of course, massively disrupts the global trade. It's a big underestimated problem that we think. The WTO forecasted a global trade reduction through COVID of around 20 to 30%. At the end, it was much less dramatic, only 10% reduction, and still the entire global supply chain is completely disrupted until now. The truth also was pointed out lately in an article from The Economist that said the information flow is largely free, at least outside of China. But people, goods, and capital are by far away from being free in terms of trade. So the old-fashioned push for free trade is, from our perspective, as modern as it should be, and we have to do a much better job to revitalize the free trade spirit all around the world. What does that have to do with our situation? Well, again, there's a bit of a disparity between what in the US is said and marketed and what the reality is. There's maybe one other aspect here in the trends in the US. This is the continued devaluation of the US dollar. This is also nothing new. This is, of course, the effect of the permanent, over decades ongoing debt levels in the US that lead to a slow devaluation of the US dollar since World War II, which, of course, because the US is the global currency still, leads to the fact that everybody in the world is kind of co-paying the American activities all over the world with this devaluation. What are we doing? We're diversifying our global supply chain. We have to find different sources for different materials that we can ship and supply around the world. Single sourcing now is much more dramatic of a problem than it ever was before. We're trying to increase visibility. This is very difficult because things change so fast and systems are not connected. I get to that when I talk about diversification, digitalization a little bit later. But we have to invest into these new technologies in order to get better transparency. We have to also add services and digital products to our physical offering. We also have to take painful decisions. As RHI Magnesita, we had a 55-year traditional, very strong, profitable, very solid business in Iran. When the sanctions were stepped up in the US last year, we took the decision to completely step out of that business. That really, really hurt. This was very painful, but it was a consequence of these new trade realities. Third topic I want to talk about are the climate actions. Already before COVID, this was on the agenda, but now this is much accelerated. The downturn of the planet is at the forefront of people's thinking, not only in Europe. It's led by the people in Europe who seem to be more worried about the future than any other region in the world, but it's not only the case in Europe. I've just had a long conversation with some customers in Russia who are very concerned about the massive pressure that they're getting from the Russian government. China has just introduced carbon trading schemes and is implementing this industry by industry. In China, we cannot do any investment anymore without global state-of-the-art best ecological technologies. And also in the US, 24 or 25 out of the US states have signed the Paris Climate Accord, even in times when the federal government has retreated from this. So the pressure is here. The speech and the trend in the US is a little bit more together than in the other areas, but still in the US, there's no carbon pricing on the horizon. There's a lot of willingness from many of the governments, not just federal, but also state, to act. But in reality, there's no nationwide scheme yet. What are we doing here? We have massively invested and increased our focus on sustainability, especially on CO2. We have a significant investment into recycling waste from our customers. We have the ambitions to take 100% of our customers' waste and put it back into value chains. This is relatively easy in geographically small regions such as Europe, because you can transport waste over short distances. In the US is a massive problem. So we have to find other solutions there, which we are following, but this is a different setup. On the CO2 side, we have a significant challenge. Our customers have a challenge which is about 100 times bigger than us, because our customers are the cement and the steel industry. They make up around 20%, almost 20% of the worldwide CO2 emissions. And so they are the two biggest CO2 emitting industries in this world. So there's a huge focus here. The problem that we share with our customers, we don't have technologies to reduce CO2. So if governments force us to do it today, the only option we have is to shut down our activities. And as a result, as a consequence, we have taken 50 million euros of our own money and are now investing it into developing these technologies, so that hopefully in very few years, 3 or 4, we will have the technologies in order to be able at least to answer to the demands of our societies. Last topic I want to talk about is digitalization. The connectivity that the world has is going up all the time, but we have to be quite open. Our businesses are not ready for this. We have run our businesses on different platforms, different generations, and although technically many things are possible, practically they're not. The cost of converting the legacy infrastructure into a modern one that can act into a seamless system like new companies such as Google or so or Amazon can do it, or Tencent if you want to take one from the Eastern world. They can run seamless infrastructure, but most other companies that are a little bit older can't. And so IT infrastructure is a challenge, but we have to tackle this, invest in this. This is the next wave as soon as we've dealt with the other issues, but probably a topic for later in 2021, but latest in 2022 and for the next years, with massive significant investments and a short-term reduction in profitability, because we need to pre-invest before we can harvest the fruits here. Other topics that are on our agenda besides these 4 big ones are the following. We have trade positions of different countries and different blocks that are challenging and endangering international alliances. They might fall apart even more, but there are new ones being created, especially in Asia. The free trade spirit is much more active there. And I think if in the Western world, especially on the transatlantic relationship, we don't pay attention, the free trade multilateralism in Asia will overpass us. It's very much supported by China, but it's also driven by the fear of all the smaller nations in Asia that China gets too dominant. Therefore, the multilateralism in Asia is moving forward, and 60% of the world population lives there. And at least in the base industries, probably 80 to 85% of the growth is there. The climate agenda will continue to be very heavy on our on our challenge radar, and the OECD tax discussion that is also fueled by the need of governments to repay the COVID support for their populations is going to, I think, require additional funds from us. Those topics, the trade positions, the climate agenda, and the OECD minimum income tax proposal all need global harmonization. Because if individual countries or country blocks move forward by themselves, then businesses will move to the less affected areas. If we don't have a more or less global CO2 pricing in a reasonable amount of time from now on, then we will endanger the industries in those regions in which CO2 emissions are expensive, and they will all move to those regions in which CO2 emissions are free. And the benefit for the world will be zero or even negative. So global harmonization, multilateralism, global institutions are going to be necessary in order to fix these areas. And then, of course, we have an infrastructure investment in different regions. This is mostly the case in China, in Europe, and in the United States, that can help us to relaunch, to tackle some of these problems. So this is a positive aspect on this list, but we're going to have to see how this works. Our business response has to come on 4 different dimensions. We have to work on the culture inside our companies. We have to educate our employees that these topics are important, not just shipping products, making products, and the profit of the next month, but the culture to be connected to our societies is important. We need faster, more agile regional structures in order to adapt to the differences that are growing, not shrinking between the different regions, but we need to be agile also to adapt. Then to tackle this increasing volatility, we need much more scenario-based steering. We have to get rid of the old way of making a 5-year plan and executing a 5-year plan. We have to be working much more in scenarios and then adapt to this as we go along. And therefore, we need flexible operational setup with a little bit different rules on labor, but also on capital, on services, and on the way we organize our businesses through IT platforms and IT infrastructures. All of this is supported by massively accelerated digitalization, which we have never done before, but now need to deliver in the course of the next very, very few years. Thank you for listening. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Borgas. And I immediately open up for questions and answers. So if you have a question, just please speak up, unmute yourself, and let's get it started. And if you allow, I would start with a question. Yeah, you mentioned in your slides, I think quite precisely and accurate, especially in the US, what is said and what are the actions. Yeah. And somehow the actions have their let's say have their origin in the past. Yeah. And also in the past administration. So would you expect that there will be more walk the talk, actions following the speech, or do you prepare that this will be an ongoing gap between what is said and what will be implemented or put in action?
Well, hopefully there will be a somewhat, again, path of coming together between speech and action. But I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we understand not only what is said, but also what is not said, but what is meant. The US has been on a very clear path towards defocusing on the transatlantic relationship towards moving to the trans-Pacific relationship. It is never said very openly because it hurts the friends on the transatlantic relationship. That's why, you know, in the Anglo-Saxon culture, you prefer not to talk about it so much, but it is very clearly happening. And this is one disparity that will stay there. And we just have to understand this, especially as Europeans. So these little bit aggressively worded requests from Trump, take care of your own things, pay for your own stuff, get involved by yourselves. He could have worded this softer and a little bit more amicably, but in principle, the advice is absolutely correct. We cannot anymore, like from 1945 to 2010 or 2008, rely on the Americans to take care of most of the problems, geopolitical problems that Europe has. This is finished. And either we do it by ourselves or not. If we don't do it by ourselves, somebody else will fill the void. If we do it by ourselves, it's going to cost more money, and we're going to have to rebuild our military, maybe in a modern way, maybe more in a cyber military way. I don't know, I'm not a military expert, but we have to speak up for ourselves and not hide behind the US, at least not in certain topics anymore. And in others, we maybe still have the chance to pull the US back into the international community, like on the climate side, for example. I think there's a real opportunity for us to lead this. We have a great technology platform bases in Europe, across the continent, also in Austria with fantastic ecotech companies. If I think we push this agenda and we develop those technologies, then on the strength of this, we can pull the Americans back into the international community here. So, but I think depending on the topic, we have to watch this.
How would you judge the role of the European Union, and what reforms may be necessary to exactly do this?
Well, I'm a passionate European, so honestly, I think it's our only chance if we want to have this impact, and if we are prepared to invest. We cannot rebuild the Austrian army and then stand our position in the world. I mean, nobody will even invite us to meetings as Austria or as Hungary or as Portugal or as Finland. We will only be invited if we act together as a bloc. Take the example of Singapore. It's a relatively small country, size-wise, more or less comparable to Austria. Some things are not comparable, but size-wise it is, and they do a very, very, very intelligent job to build international institutions and position themselves there. Austria has done this really well in the Cold War, and even after it has joined, then the European Union post-89 has done this very well, and I think we have a great opportunity to continue to do this, but we need the EU for this. We absolutely need it, and we need to stop bashing it and stop claiming that all the problems in Austria are because of the EU and all the things that go well are because of the great local decisions. That's not the case. So, and here as business leaders, I think we need to speak up and push and help our governments to make the point there. I think the current government we have here is trying this.
Okay. I have a question. Do the steel companies worldwide, do they work together to find solutions in terms of new technology, or is there just as much competition as in the 70s? The US, Europe pushed out steel companies, to Brazil as an example. At that time, you had 1 million ton capacity. Now you're at 20, 30 million. Is that ongoing, or the competition, or is there some kind of a common idea of saying, how can we overcome this problem?
I'm afraid to say the steel industry, from our perspective, is not working together to tackle the big CO2 topics. They're not working together as an industry. I think it has less to do with the fact that they are partially competing with each other, but it has more to do with the fact that it seems, at least, nobody wants to be the first one to take responsibility to make a significant move, because it could very well be that the first mover here is going to go bankrupt because of the legislative systems being very different from one place to another. This is the speed of decarbonization is going to be very different, and the ones who decarbonize first are the ones going to be the ones with the highest cost position, and their business is endangered. So everybody's sitting there and watching the others. If you speak to the energy companies or the chemical industry, they are much further ahead, much further. They have plans, they sit in their associations, they bring in third-party research institutes, they fund this, and they move forward with an agenda. And the steel industry is hobbling behind, and they're trying different things. Many companies are doing something, but it's very uncoordinated, unfortunately, still. The cement industry is a little bit better here, but the cement business is more local. Yeah. So there's less global competition here. So this is a big problem.
And do you, as a company, work together with some steel companies to find solutions?
Yes. Oh, very much. Yeah, we have investments, cash, but also people investments in different horizons. We are probably the next thing that will happen in the steel industry is that the big blast furnaces, in which iron ore and coal gets heated up and injected with oxygen, and this is how you produce iron. That's probably the first technology that will disappear, and that can be replaced by a pellet production process to make iron pellets, which are then melted in an electric arc furnace. This is the replacement technology. That doesn't eliminate the carbon, but it reduces the carbon footprint if there's green electricity available by around 30 to 40%. So this is not bad. And it looks like this is the first wave now that is happening in the steel industry. We're very much invested in actually quite different parts of the world, but led by Europe. So here, Europe has a real chance. The next wave then is the replacement of oxygen reduction by hydrogen reduction. But for this, the steel industry needs a hydrogen production infrastructure first in massive scale. That's not available because we don't have any green electricity. So this is more like 10, 15 years away, but that's the big next wave. And then there's a third wave of technology change, especially led in the US, where there are totally new engineering solutions in order to make metals, not just steel, but also steel, copper, nickel, but also steel. And this is maybe 15 to 20 years out when we talk about large scale rollout, but we're invested here also together with people like the Gates Foundation, who's very passionate about this topic also. And interestingly to see in China, lots of research on this, lots of research and technology investments into decarbonization technologies.
Okay, thank you.
So, and we're involved all over the globe here in order to stay at the forefront and try to bring solutions from our side.
Mr. Borgas, you mentioned cultural change as one of your topics. And how do you see your company going back after COVID times in this perspective on way of working and digitalization and traveling and change for all your people in that perspective?
Yeah, okay. We we've tried, even in the hardest lockdowns, we've tried to be balanced because we're part of the essential infrastructure chain. Without refractories, there's no steel, glass, cement, copper, none of this. It cannot happen without our products. They are being replaced relatively quickly. So we had to continue to operate. So we never shut down our plants. And even in our offices, we tried to always have something like 20, 25% people there at all times, and not to go to this radical, to these radical setups. What we found during that time is that the preparedness of the people to be flexible in their work setup and to have their personal schedule adapt to the needs of their jobs, depending on the day, is extremely high, is much, much higher than we have trained them to be with all the rigid work systems that we've had in the past, that we've kind of inherited, from the early 20th century. Counting work in hours, for example, really is a stupid thing. It's just what we're used to. And what we are doing now, we have spent a lot of effort in the years where we merged the Austrian RHI with the Brazilian Magnesita. We've spent a lot of time in these merger years to rebuild the culture of this joint company. And in these years, we have established what we call cultural champions. These are people that are sitting all over the world and that are teaching people to behave according to the same rules. Yeah, we want people to, for example, bring problems on the table and talk about them openly without attacking each other. It's a behavior that we like to see, because in this very global business that we run, this is very necessary. And that's what we have a bunch of those kinds of culture behaviors that we are teaching through this network of cultural champions. We have 60 cultural champions that are placed all over the world in all of the sites, and they come together once or twice a year, physically even, in order to train on the next level of workshops and teachings. Those cultural champions now we have redeployed or upgraded or turned into becoming digital champions. And they're now teaching our employees on how to work with these digital tools. If you have a 50-year-old supervisor in a production plant, this is not a digital workplace, right? It's a physical workplace. He still needs to learn how to respond to an emergency call on his cell phone. He doesn't, when he has in his emergency shift, he doesn't necessarily need to go to the plant anymore. We have now digital tools that alert him, but he needs to know how on his cell phone he can dial into the camera and monitor the plant through the cameras. It's a very practical example. And we have hundreds of those challenges all over the world. And we use this network of cultural champions, now digital champions, in order to teach this. And this is 9 months old, this change. This is one of the ways we do this. I think we will go back. We will, of course, bring back more physical meetings, but we have overestimated the speed in which this happens. People are very careful in traveling because of health concerns, but also because by far not as many physical meetings are necessary anymore. More physical contact is needed than we're doing now. You can see the desire, the personal desire for people to touch each other, to hug each other, to shake hands and not to kick feet anymore. But and I think so. We will go back, I would say, 3/4 of the way, but no more than that.
Thank
and
you.
Then have a whole set of other things that we didn't do before. We have for example, we have for 20 years tried to roll out a customer relationship management system for our sales force. And we've put out 3 versions and 3 rollout waves, and 3 CEOs have tried, and they all failed because the sales guys said, yeah, we don't need this really. Now we're rolling it out, and the adoption is almost instantaneous. It's incredible. It's a breakthrough on the adoption, not on the technology.
Could you say a little bit more about the success of the merger between RHI and Magnesita? I mean, we all know that not every merger is successful. These are former competitors who now have to cooperate. There may, of course, there should and may be synergies, but there may also be demotivation on part of the staff, and there may be a loss of know-how and a kind of clash of cultures, and you mentioned it right now. It's important to build a new joint culture. I was involved in the merger between RHI or Radex at that time and Pfizer in the early 1990s, where a special focus was also given to this aspect. And I think, yes, at the end, it was quite successful. Interesting enough, at that time, Pfizer was taken over by Radex, but at the end, majority of top positions were held by former Pfizer staff. That was also an interesting development. Well, could you briefly summarize on what has happened between RHI and Magnesita?
Yeah. So Andreas, I can happily report that we finally completed the merger between Pfizer and Radex now. But we also had to completely redo the merger between Pfizer, Radex, and Didier. That wasn't done. That was relatively separate. We also had to do the merger between Magnesita and LWB, which wasn't done. And we had to do the merger between Wülfrath and the French part of LWB as well. So we found when Magnesita and RHI came together, we found that we were not dealing with two companies, but we were actually dealing with six or seven companies that had subcultures. So we decided to deal with this as a restart. We, in hindsight, had the benefit of 1 year of government approvals, antitrust approvals to prepare. It took 1 year to get the antitrust approvals all over the world before we could actually do the merger. And that was, in hindsight, a huge benefit because we used this time in order to, almost like a military invasion, prepare the coming together of these companies, the day one. We created the team. It took me 3 months to convince the first guy in RHI to step out of his job and go into this integration team without guarantee to ever come back on his job. But at the end, we had 250 people in this integration team, full-time, they didn't know what they were going to do afterwards at the time when they went into. But starting from the executive team down into all the levels of organization, wave by wave, we redesigned the entire company. We built a short-term strategy plan, which was mostly focused on delivering the synergies. Because, of course, that's the payback, right, for the premium that you pay for such a merger. So that's the financial necessity. And that was the center of the strategic objectives. And then we built this integration team. We designed the entire organization. And on the day of the closure, 800 people left the company. Every salesperson had his account responsibility all over the world so that we wouldn't lose one customer. Every salesperson got a booklet, an electronic booklet with all the sales history from both sides from the last 5 years and with clear sales objectives for the next 12 months. And they went out on day one, like a cannon start in golf, everybody at the same time. Let's say within 1 week, they went all to the same customers, but there was no two sales guys from two companies coming, fighting with each other. This was all pre-organized. And I think that was the secret of success. We picked the people based on a totally transparent process. We told them that we're going to have 6 executive members, but 11 candidates. So we're going to pick 6 out of the 11. And the other 5 will not have a job, or they will get a job on the level below. And so forth. We published this schedule in March 2017. The closing date was November 2017. And then about every 6 weeks, there was the next level of organization designed. And everybody knew on the 1st of November whether they had a job or not. And even those people who didn't have a job at least had clarity. And therefore, we avoided politics, because this went so stringently and transparently and also so quickly that there wasn't a lot of time for alliances and Seilschaften and things like this to be created, and things went well. And we've also found that actually the scientists, the research scientists in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, they have much more the same culture and the same thinking and the same acting than the scientists in Leoben, than their own colleagues in Brazil who are in sales. So they very quickly we found out the big issue is not between Magnesita and RHI or between Brazil and Austria, but continues to be between the sales guys and the plant guys and the scientists and the finance people. So we changed our cultural behavior measures in order to break down these functional silos. And I think that was the success. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's where you win or lose the merger battle. And we put this culture team in place already in August, July, August, before the closing. And it's still there. We're still working on it.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah, with this.
May I just have one last question on ESG reporting? You know, being a banker, people are looking at steel companies, you know, producing electricity from coal. Are you affected by it already in a major way? Because as I understand, companies which do have a large CO2 emission will probably be penalized by paying a higher spread, by being, you know, probably in the capital market, of having some type of a disadvantage. Do you already feel that coming?
Yeah, we feel this, but for us, it's much more of an opportunity than a threat at this point in time, because we're ahead of the curve, at least when it comes to our industry. We would consider ourselves as one of the heavy polluting industries. We emit around 5.5 million tons of CO2 per year, which for a company of our size is not massive compared to steel and cement, but it's still significant. And our problem is 80% of this we don't know how to eliminate. But with all the actions we have put in place, we have received actually credit discounts on almost all of our external financing, because on the ESG side, we're ahead of the curve and we're showing the progress. So from an ESG investor, actually, you have two camps. You have the ones who like all the clean industries, but you also have the ones who like those players in the dirty industries that actually make big progress, because that's where you get the benefit from, right? At the end of the day, as a planet, we don't get the benefit from a service business who has no CO2 emissions. We get the benefit from the heavy industry getting rid of the CO2. Then we get the benefit. And more and more this is accepted. I have to admit, though, that we're listed in London, so we have a lot of discussions with investors, with international investors, and there is a certain level of cynicism around this topic. They like us to have a good rating, they would like us to make progress, but they don't want us really to invest for the sake of reducing CO2. They only want us to invest if we truly have an economic payback. Otherwise, they tell us don't invest. So in the financial markets, this is still not harmonized. And very interestingly, if I have a fund manager who is 40 or younger, he is very happy that we put 50 million euros R&D risk money without knowledge of payback now. If I have a fund manager who's older, they don't want us to do this.
Okay.
It's a little bit black and white, but there's quite clearly two groups. And there is an clear age correlation.
Thank you.
Yeah, with this, I think we're 3 minutes past 10. And I think a perfect timing in that respect. Once again, thank you very much, Stefan Borgas, for your really, really great insights in fascinating industries. Also, not only about RHI and Magnesita, but also on your point of view on global challenges we face on the political side as well as on the economic side. We wish you all the best with your team and your company up front. And thank you very much once again for being our guest and giving this excellent keynote today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And please help us in bringing multilateralism back.
We do our best, I guarantee you. And we will have next week a press conference, especially on this, addressing both sides of the Atlantic, the US as well as EU and Austria, to walk the talk. That's the name of the game. I fully agree with you, but we need to see actions, and the AmCham is behind this with all our efforts.
Great.
With this, thank you very much. We wish you a great Friday and a nice weekend, and hope to see you soon on the next AmCham Talk, 25th of June. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.